schools at the moment. And I'd like you to share with us your thoughts about if there was something you could change in the way we're teaching kids to maybe make them feel more proud of living sustainably on a beautiful island like Tasmania. What would you teach them?
Well, because it's my passion, then the first thing I would say is that every child has the right to connection with the natural world. And I think there is a danger that our focus on technology is, and also the fear that we live out of about our children and what will happen if we give them freedom, limits that opportunity for children. And I think it's something that should be an absolute priority, that children can have free play, free time in the natural world in order to develop their creativity, their imagination.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jo. Over here. Wendy, you've got a microphone.
Hi, just a couple of things. I know from Colony 47's point of view, when we talk about old economies or new economies, there's a whole range of people coming to organisations like ours now who wouldn't have in the past, because the participation rate in Tasmania isn't high enough, and they're not participating because manufacturing, for a whole range of globalisation reasons, or our size and scale and transport and distance, we know those economic reasons, have moved offshore. And those were the sorts, and that's why this economy ticked over with those semi-skilled jobs. Well, they aren't there anymore. And there's no other choices for these people, and then it leads, of course, to a whole range of other issues when you're unemployed. So there's a whole new range of social situations happening there, and a lot of it's because they aren't skilled, and for generations in this state we had extractive industries where you made a pretty good living on pretty low education levels, and so it wasn't really an issue. I think that education is the key, but I really don't want to bash education too much, and I think there are issues with the curriculum. There are structural issues about kids who are in rural and regional areas, and whether 11 and 12 is attached to a school or is in a college, I think is going to be immaterial. I think we're putting old paradigms over new ways of thinking. The NBN will change that incredibly. And I think that it doesn't belong to the Education Department, the skills of our population and the skills going forward. It belongs to us as a community. And we haven't valued education. And I think it's about aspirations, it's about excellence, it's about striving and people reaching their potential. And so I think education departments become easy targets.
Exactly. I wanted to kind of unpack one of and invite other people to reflect on, is there a sense that, as we just heard, that the kind of system that I grew up in, when I finished school, which was year 10, I was the only male in that school that went to year 11. All of the rest did trades, did apprenticeships. There's skills, by the way, that I don't have, but that was kind of how it was. So is there a sense, do we have a shared view that even if we wanted to live in that world is somewhere behind us? Is there someone who would like to argue that that's not the case up the back? Please go ahead.
I want to argue the opposite from a recent experience in Singapore of 3.5 years, and an investment by the Singaporean government of over 70 million in just simply looking at what's called the Institute of Adult Learning. And I just find that in Australian terms we're not seriously looking at our human resources and the adaptation that is necessary to be made in a future economy. And I think we're in danger of becoming a second-rate because of the mining boom and the sort of complacency and things like Holden going out the back door now. We we are not looking at where we're going to go and how we're going to train adjust that workforce.
So here's a thought that, and we must then start to wrap this session up, and I'll pass to Graham. How many times have you heard many people in public life, a Premier, but lots of others, say that we are in an economic transition? Have we heard those words being used? I hear them a lot. We're in an economic transition, aren't we? We all agree we're in an economic transition?
What does it mean?
Yeah. What are we in an economic transition to? John, do we ever get told that? Please.
Well, I think the phrase economic transition is just meaningless political gobbledygook. It's like George
Now tell us what you
Orwell,
really think.
when you call the police force and the security services the Ministry of Love. It's just a meaningless phrase. I also think we're talking too much about old economies and new economies. I don't know if the dichotomy is all that important. Looking through a long turn of history, the hydro-industrialisation was very successful in making Tasmania a lot less poorer. Yeah. And if you had a job at the zinc works, you got 50 to 100% more than if you were working as a day labourer or an agricultural labourer. But that started to fall apart with increased mechanisation in the 60s and 70s. And you need to find new ways of attracting industry to Tasmania. Now, economically, Tasmania suffers from a relatively small population, removed from Tasmania with a remarkably expensive piece of water called Bass Strait. People tell me I'm wrong, but I believe the various monopolies like Toll and people before them, Hollymans and so on, have profited enormously from the fact that it costs more to get a container from Hobart to Melbourne than it does to get it from Hobart to Singapore.
Perhaps that's what makes us an island.
But to overcome that, we need to look at something unique, something different, and there's certainly scope in tourism, but you can't be totally involved in tourism. You need to be clever and find new ways, so you need to encourage people with new ideas. And I've got a new idea. We grow a lot of opium poppies in Tasmania, and I'm a lawyer, so I come across most of the criminals and heads around the place from time to time, and we don't seem to have grown a generation of opium addicts, even though we grow poppy. So what we should now grow in a large industrial scale is cannabis, which is an excellent source of fibre. It makes very hard-wearing soft clothes. It's a source of high-quality paper. We should be the cannabis capital of the world, and so it is the fibre.
Cannabis capital of the world, I like that. So we must start to think about wrapping this session up. What I'd therefore like to do is invite people to give us very short little interventions on a positive vision. We've talked about perhaps what is not going to sustain us, what is not going to carry us forward, and some challenges, be they on the Bass Strait or anywhere else. What is this new economy thing? What's our vision for how that's going to work for us? Just, is it tourism? Is it high-value food? Is it the knowledge economy? Just really short.
I'd like to slightly challenge the new economy. In terms of perspective, we tend to look at it as entirely new things, whereas really where we're seeing the true innovation is it is entirely new ways of conceptualising old things. And I think that's a really important thing that we need to consider, that we are not removing the old products and services, we are delivering them in new ways and re-envisioning how they can be used and where they can be delivered from. And I think that's a big difference.
Mike, up the back.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, I think. But there was also, I think, a fear of change down here, and there's this fairly sinister term, business as usual, which almost suggests you're plodding along, doing the same things, and if you get out of that comfort zone, it's scary and you're going to fall off a cliff or something awful is going to happen. And yet there are so many opportunities down here that we need to grasp and build on. And once people embrace change as an opportunity, instead of seeing it as a fear, it's much easier to see some opportunities. We've heard about opium poppies, wasabi, aquaculture, superb industries that are here already. wine, tourism, renewable energy.
Yeah.
We have a lot with hydro. There's a lot more we can do with that. We've got a fantastic university that's coming out with huge numbers of research projects. Some of those can be commercialised into products, into new ideas that can be made here. And we can upskill people to do those jobs. So there's huge opportunity. And I see the diversified economy here as being really a real strength, whereas perhaps WA has got mining. They haven't got a lot else. We've got a huge number of different things that we can build on. If they all grow at 10% a year, then we're doing really well. And I think some of, as you said, some of the problem with the measurement is that we're being measured on a global, large organisation level, rather than a small is beautiful, lots of diverse little companies all employing more people than massive global companies that are trying to cut heads all the time.
Beautiful. Thank you, Mike. I'm going to pass the baton. This conversation does not cease. It rolls through to another baton holder, to Graham, to continue with our second focus, please.
Thank you for that, Phil. And I think the conversation has already gone in beautifully unpredictable ways. And in fact, I'm going to suggest almost taking a step back, or maybe raising our eyes a little bit higher. Perhaps back to right where we started, which is alongside whatever economic model, whatever source of livelihood we have in the future, what else do we want Tasmania to look like? And I don't know what was behind Penny's question or suggestion about measurement, but what would success for Tasmania as a whole look like, looking ahead, of which obviously the economy is a key part? But what do you think success would look like looking a decade ahead? Chris?
Thanks. I actually think we've undergone a huge transition to date. This debate's been with us for some 35 years, and what Tasmania has, we may be considered to be at the bottom of the heap in orthodox economic terms, but what Tasmania has is the best set of attributes that any place could have in terms of soils, clean water, dispersed population, and so forth, a whole array of attributes. Second point is that in terms of the scenarios for the future, I think we have a very insecure future, and in terms of scenarios that we may be confronted by, Tasmania is even more in even a better place than everywhere else in Australia. We've got such tremendous advantages. So instead of Dick Jones, who inspired the existence of Sustainable Living Tasmania, started this debate in many respects as a way that Tasmania ought to go by preference. I think now we're in a situation where we need to respond to what is happening. We have no choice but to do that, and in that respect Tasmania is very well placed.
Okay, thanks, Chris. What other thoughts? Yeah, Mark.
Success would be that every child at birth has the same opportunity no matter where they come from. So
that's a beautiful heroic goal, isn't it?
And what would flow from that is support for children's education, right from pre-birth, that's where it starts, and support for the parents and carers to be the best possible parents and carers that they can be for those children. If we get that right at that stage, so much more flows from that later on in life.
And connected with that point, I think, is what I'd like to see is there would be far less disadvantage, less poverty, fewer poorer people in Tasmania in the future, because there is a large minority of people who are living very poorly in Tasmania, and it ties in with what you just said, because those people, if they have children, frankly don't know how to parent properly, and they have no ambitions, they have no aspirations, and most important in terms of what we've all been saying, they don't value education. Somebody said earlier they don't want to bash the education department. You've got to get over that. It's not the education department, it's the fact there's a large proportion of the community that simply doesn't value education, and teachers can turn themselves inside out, and they do practically every day. But if the kids couldn't give a rat's about what's happening out the front of the classroom, then because their parents don't care, there's no ambition, no value of education, then it's a really big problem. So what we really need is to get past that, which links very much to a physical poverty and which becomes kind of a mental poverty, which affects the way people live their lives and what they value and don't value, or even have the capacity to value because their lives are so consumed with surviving.
Thank you for that. Andrew, behind you.
I mean, I think what I'd like to see, not in 10 years' time, but maybe in 50 years' time, is a resilient economy here where we actually have become an attractor for the rest of the world to look and see what a sustainable island can do and how it's made the transition into the future. So I'd like to see a longer time span, and I'd like to see us bringing people or just the interest in how we've actually done it. And that takes into account the education, it takes into account having some leadership at a national, at a state level, to actually deploy the resources in such a way that we can shape the island and we can actually move in a positive direction. So, yep, that's what I'd like to see in the future.
Thanks, Andrew.
Great. Just building on the last couple of comments, going even back to Robbie and Mike. Success to me, I'll go around about this in a roundabout way, but success to me would be Tasmania where our children are less inclined to leave, our smartest children are less inclined to leave to go and make it elsewhere. And if they do, have a reason to come back. And so that we're not just left with the dregs. Now, building on what Penny was just saying, well, look, it's unfortunately true. Our brightest and smartest leave because it's easier there. The rest of the country, the rest of the world makes it easier for us. We're hard on ourselves half the time, and we don't give ourselves the role models. But coming even back to what Ron said, we need that leadership. But the problem, I think one of the problems that we've got here is the mindset of Tasmania is we're always looking to government for leadership when we really need to look at ourselves and entrepreneurs and us as business and wealth generators to say, look, I can do this. This is an opportunity. Let's see if we can make a go of it here. Win or fail, succeed or fail. Take the risk. Let people take the risk. And then those people will be the employers and the wealth generators of the future, which will hopefully dig us out of this big hole.
Thanks for that. I just want to ask you another question, and it really feeds on what you just suggested. What is it that you think, or anyone else in the room thinks, are the qualities, the characteristics, the benefits that Tasmania can offer in the future to either keep or attract back those that might have left, or indeed attract others like me who have come in from the outside? What do you think are the qualities of the lifestyle, of the sustainable future, whatever it might be? Yep.
Creative industries is what I'm seeing in the state, and getting plenty of clients through from that area.
Do you want to say a little bit more about that? Is that a strength that we can build on? Is that something new? Is that...
No, I think it's something that we've always had as a small state because you're not put pigeonholed into little boxes as much in a small state. So I think we've got great creative talent here and we should exploit that.
Yep. Hand up here.
Sorry, I'll just tell 3 unrelated anecdotes. We had a client once who came to see us about building him a house out past New Norfolk in the hills, fresh supply of water coming by his house. He was from England and decided that Tasmania was as far away as possible from any of the catastrophe that was going to hit there anytime soon. So he was looking at Tasmania as an island to escape to. I was in Sydney very recently. I went to a bar and bought Tasmanian rain, and then I went to have Tasmanian Wagyu beef, and then I went and enjoyed a Tasmanian organic cider, and that's another offering that Tasmania has. And I'm also heavily involved in tourism projects, and some of their most amazing, which takes me to some of the most amazing landscape, and that's something that I think is an amazing offering to Tasmania as well, and beaches that, you know, there's nobody else on the beach, and I mean these are things that we all know, but it's just getting to do that as part of my
doesn't
job
harm to repeat them. Any other qualities or characteristics, yeah.
I just wanted to actually some characteristics from a technology point of view that actually offer us potential to attract more into the state. If you look at the major players in the technology arena, Microsoft, Google, Apple, Amazon, they're spending massive amounts of money to set up data centres in locations with cool climate, with access to renewable energy, and with strong data infrastructure that they can connect to. And they're going to places like Greenland. Google's currently, in secret, building a massive floating barge of a data centre in the middle of San Francisco harbour so they can cool it with seawater. We have politically stable environment. We are geologically stable. We have renewable energy on the grid. You don't have to build special generators and infrastructure to get connected to it. And the NBN is, a little bit less certain, but we do have we have Basslink and 2 other cables connecting us. We need to do something about the cost, but the part of that is around volume. If we can attract some of these people down here, there is actually a very strong, attractive proposition that Tasmania holds for the technology industry to provide access to Southeast Asia.
So, Andrew?
One comment on the natural resources, on the human resources. New Zealand did a study a couple of years ago, Massey University, and there's 5 million Kiwis, and 1 million of them don't live in New Zealand. And they wanted to find out about the ones that had left, and they did a survey through the professional associations, and they got 250,000 responses, which is phenomenal. Wow. And the people who were most likely to return were not those who were entrepreneurs or senior executives of businesses. In other words, the people who grow economies and grow companies didn't see the opportunities for them in New Zealand, and they left, and they didn't have any plans on returning. So to pick up the comment that that gentleman made over there, I think we're ideally placed to bring technology here, to bring a whole range of industries, but we've got to create the conditions that allow them to flourish. And I don't think we have those conditions. We might think we do, but I don't think it actually really exists as a value proposition to make that barge come here. Maybe we don't want the barge, but that's sort of an idea.
Duncan.
I just wonder whether I've been thinking about this as people have been speaking, but in a sense I wonder whether we have an oil and water community, in a sense that those who are participating in this conversation are part of a group that has aspirations and views that sit above or float above a base that has a different cultural understanding of what success is and what is meaningful. And I think the comment about education and culture was very telling, in that I think one of the greatest challenges is a shift in culture, and perhaps in some strange way Tasmanian governments have been rather too successful in managing crisis, because crisis usually brings about opportunity, but when change is gradual, people still hold on to cultural norms and expectations even though the capacity to implement them shifts. And so we haven't had that profound shock that sometimes leads to the clearances in Scotland where people left, but we've got our underclass that is still hanging on to culture and expectations. And a conversation that unites those cultures, I think, is a conversation that really needs to happen, because I don't think it's engaged in that at the moment. The second point, I suppose, that flows from that is that I think if you recognise that there's a sort of a normal curve of distribution of everything, we are not going to be able to generate any reasonable education system that's going to take those at the lower end of the bell curve that historically have earned their living by the use of sweat of their brow and labouring and jobs that required relatively little educational input. We're not going to transition them into a high-tech end of the economic sector. So where is job growth going to come from? I think that John's suggestion about, say, growing hemp and things like that, are all part of it. But curiously, I think one of our, and I just put this forward as a I suppose as a piece of intellectual jiu-jitsu, one of the one of the deficits that we're going to face is our ageing. We've got essentially an ageing component of a Tasmanian population. We're going to have to provide very substantial resources to support that ageing community. But curiously, all the things that people talk about at this place as a wonderful place to be and to live in suggests to me that actually it might be quite a strategic thing to do to try and position Tasmania to attract people of my age and post, the baby boomers. Because when we think of old people, we think of poor old pensioners. But there's going to be a huge number of people who will be retiring out of the workforce, both in Australia, interstate, and internationally, who will want someplace safe, someplace that is attractive, green, and environmentally friendly, progressive, open. And it's a huge generator of employment. It's a huge generator of employment. And the people I'm talking about would then attract to Tasmania their children, and you would develop more and more. So one of the things we are going to have to do is provide for our own ageing. We've got surplus requirements in infrastructure in a whole range. We've got schools that we don't need anymore, hospitals we don't need anymore. We try to keep unsustainable numbers of hospitals going in tiny centres. We've got schools going in places that logic suggests are unsustainable educationally. We've got all this infrastructure that we have to provide, and we're going to have to provide more of it. It will be extremely expensive to do it for an ageing population, but if we started strategically to market to those older Australians and older persons internationally with a good health system, looking at making Tasmania the centre of geriatric training, a whole range of medical support and the like, it is actually one of the largest employers in the services side that is possible to imagine. But it's a cultural shift because it is not the dignified labour of digging, you know, earth and chopping trees. It's a huge employer, but whenever I suggest this, people go, I've never heard a response positively to it because it's just not what we want to hear. We don't want to be the capital for old age in the world.
Is there anyone...
So it's a cultural problem, and yet it would be an enormous opportunity for employment.
Thank you, Duncan. Anyone who operates... Yeah, Paul.
Amen, Duncan. Thank you. A few points. One of the things that we are facing as an ageing population, particularly in Tasmania, South Australia has a similar profile in terms of demography, is that the number of people available to be unpaid carers is diminishing. The number of people available to become paid carers is diminishing. I work in the disability sector. We have the National Disability Insurance Scheme that's going to be rolling out over the next few years, and we are going to have to double our workforce in Tasmania in the next 5 to 7 years. Now, where are we going to get them from? We talked earlier, and as some of the people have been talking about our best and our brightest leaving the state. My 19-year-old stepdaughter, who's in the Navy, is going on to do engineering. She said to me a week or so ago, there's a reason I left Tasmania. Now, what I need to do is go and ask her why. We have a whole group of people who are in that underclass, that group who perhaps don't have the opportunity that in previous generations that they have had. I just attended a national housing conference, and they had a guest speaker from America, the chap who runs their housing department nationally. And he said they did a study in New York, and they discovered that it costs the New York economy about $80,000 a year to maintain a homeless person, somebody who's a rough sleeper. It costs them $40,000 to take that homeless person and to give them purpose and give them services. So if we are going to invest in our future, we can't just accept that there is a whole group of people who are not going to be engaged. We need to do something to engage them.
So we've had some strong themes around participation and inclusion and equal opportunity from birth or maybe before birth. We've had some strong themes about education and skills, and I think a culture shift and a confidence, whether it be at an individual or a state level. Question that I think Duncan prompted is, and others have referred to, is the kind of change we need something that can happen gradually? Is it an evolutionary change? Do we make small steps along a route towards a destination, or does it require that kind of more seismic shift?
The question which I think you're touching on is what's the role of government, because it comes back to the point Ron made about leadership. And I actually wrote an article for the Griffith Review, and I suspect I'm not the only one in the room who did. But the point I was making in that was the role of government is to be a risk manager, it's not to be a driver. And the reality is that a whole sweep of history over generations, if not centuries, has been where the government tried to overstate its role and direct future economies or future populations. They usually get it wrong, and they'll end up increasing taxes with no discernible benefits. So therefore the question that the government or governments and we as a community that we need in for future governments is not to say here are the answers, it's to provide a general framework. As Adrian said, is to provide a framework where businesses that generate wealth and generate those opportunities for the future can flourish, rather than trying to say here are the answers.
Yeah. Acknowledge your view. I'm just still interested in whatever the role of government may or may not be, is the kind of movement a gradual one, or does it need to be more radical? Yeah.
I actually don't think you need to ask that question, because I think it's going to be forced upon us. It can't be gradual, it won't be gradual. We don't know exactly what it is, but there are so many things that could happen that will force things to change very rapidly. Tasmania imports $1 billion a year of petroleum products. That could double in price, it could not be available. Yeah. Climate change impacts in terms of migrations of populations, bushfires. There's a whole lot of, and I'm not predicting, and I don't want to be a catastrophist, but I think the answer is it will be forced on us. Okay. And it's a matter of being ready to respond.
I think it's important for us also to note that at present, and this is not an advertisement for any particular colour of government, but at present, there are 3 regional reference groups for economic development, Northwest, North and South. There are 3 very comprehensive regional economic development plans that underpin a state economic development plan, and that in the recent flurry of discussions around the Economic Diversification Task Force, there were over 1,800 economic development proposals presented to the federal and state group. So I don't think that there is any lack of creativity. I don't think there's any lack of will. I think there is immense energy in this state around economic development, and that's at small, medium and large scales of engagement. I think there's an enormous amount to look forward to. I also think that, if you do thinking about jiu-jitsu, Duncan, I was told the other day that the largest employer in the state actually are small to medium enterprises, and that, where there's buoyancy there, employment is better off too. I think the figure that was quoted to me was that if every small employer was able to employ 1 more person, then we would address the unemployment rate in this state overnight. And of course the issue there is that a lot of people working in small sectors live very close to the margins at all times. So how do we provide courage? How do we do all of this? And how does government enable that, rather than constantly be seen to be that this is where, it's been described as statist developmentalism. It's a horrible term. Okay, we want to cut away from the state. So I would like us to stay optimistic and buoyant about this.
So a call for optimism. I'm going to take one more comment from Suhail and then pass over to Phil to try and draw some complex threads together and discuss where we go from here. Suhail.
I just want to follow...
You're fine, just put it to your mouth.
Just to follow what Paul said, and that is, I think, quite fundamental, is what is it that attracts people, younger ones, to Tasmania? Even if we develop the industry to do with the old age, we still need the young ones to be able to service them. I can assure you that if there is a job in here, and if there is a job in Melbourne CBD, my son will go to Melbourne CBD, as he did. And the reason is, I think we need to change this concept that everyone likes a deserted beach with no one in there. Young ones, younger generation, we are created to be together. We created to socialize. We created to sometimes get lost in the crowd. Not everyone likes that kind of mentality of being in a deserted place, just look at the mountains all the time. And we need to create conditions that are conducive to attraction of people to Tasmania. Now, let me just tell you about this new development happening here, Macquarie Point development.
How long have you got?
Well, okay. See, this is a great opportunity for Hobart and Tasmanians to respond to the social needs of Hobart. But how many of us have been able to contribute towards that discussion yet?
Okay. Thanks, Sahel.
This has been a very wonderful and very rich conversation, and I feel very privileged to be participating in it. Let's think about the question, where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? We can think about that in a couple of ways. We could think about that as I tend to do, let's leap to the solution. What's the solution? Let's just get on with it, Come on. There's some bright people in here. We've got lots of good ideas. What are we waiting for? Let's go. But where do we go from here could also be a reflection on what is holding us back. What is that that's actually preventing us from seizing the day, the sunshine, the clean air, the resources, the smart people, and turning that into the kind of future we're describing. Roscoe, you got a view about that? You want to share your insights? Where do we go from here? How do we go forward?
Thank you, Phil. Look, I'll probably try and address that through the health and wellbeing lens, and I'm certainly not talking about the healthcare system, which is one of the contributors, I think, to some of the issues we face economically. Especially in the sense that the budget going towards health is actually detracting from investment in things that really matter for health, such as education, housing, employment, and what we call the social determinants of health. So, for me, if I can go back to a step to what success looks like, for me personally, in 10 years' time, government will have ripped at least $15 million a year guaranteed out of the hospital system in Tasmania and given it to a mechanism that provides for place-based development, driven by a mechanism that gives us an overarching mandate for us to work in a similar way. I don't know much about the Kerner model that Elaine mentioned, but the important point there is not to do it to communities, but with and develop local initiatives. Of course, we can't build Tasmania upon cottage industries, but creativity and innovation are really possible. And we believe we can do a heck of a lot more with our intergenerational poverty to create a demand for both well-being and a better economy.
Are we failing to embrace these opportunities that we've been talking about? Not because, as I think we've agreed, we kind of think we can do without, a transition to something new, something more challenging, but because we're afraid of it, because we don't know what it is, because the unknown, is always more frightening, even than something that's really bad, that we know that's not sustainable. But it's familiar, and we grew up kind of thinking that that was normal. Are we afraid of the new, Warren Boyles? Are we afraid of what might be another different path for us? Yeah, you're going to get in there anyway, Murray, but let Warren have a go.
I don't think we're afraid of the new, but it might not be exactly on the point, but I'm hearing a lot of... I've got a background the last 20 years in softcore business.
You and most other Tasmanians by the sound of it. Yeah.
what I'm not hearing, and I've been looking around the world in the last couple of years and saying, who is doing it well?
Yeah.
And I met a chap from Singapore who told me, I said, how do you do this? And he said, well, we were blessed with no resources. And then I looked recently at Denmark, which is a very small economy, high tax, which probably doesn't sit well on current political fashion, but almost zero unemployment, very high levels of education, they simply do not stint on that, very small differentials in salary in the public sector at least. Then I looked at Iceland, and either side of the global financial crisis, Iceland had the highest per capita population in the world, and its population's about half of Tasmania. So it seems to me we've done a lot of wheel rediscovery in this island, and if we looked at those economies, the thing that stood out to me was they're unafraid of public industry, which is not fashionable, I know. I don't know if the railway system's viable or not. But if we were to run a Tasmanian government railway, something like the railway system in Denmark, what it does provide is guaranteed cheap transport, so that does future-proof us against what the gentleman was saying here, if we ever get caught without petroleum, which, believe me, is entirely possible. What it also did in the old days, how many people knew someone who did an apprenticeship with the hydro or the government railways? And I can't see where we're getting those middle-level people from. If you've ever tried to run a business in this state, you'll find there are plenty of people with degrees in sociology, umpteen lawyers, but you try and find a tradie. And I think we've got a massive gap in there, and I think that's a job that would be attractive to some of the folk that we're talking about that are in the underclass. They don't want to serve the boys that I taught in my other career as a teacher. They don't want to serve cafe latte, they don't want to be tour guides, but they sure as hell want to fix things. And I think that's a huge part of the education system which we could send kids into if we weren't afraid to have at least some good public industry. And I think good public industry is just as good private industry.
Yeah, really nice.
If we did run the railways at a loss, and we seem to have to do that, and it may not be the answer, but if we ran that public industry at a loss, but we saw a very good supply of skilled tradies coming out of that, we might agree that the overall outcome for the state might be well worth a couple of $1 million we lost here and there.
Yeah. So another intervention here at the back?
Yeah, I'm just reflecting on my past, and I'm looking at moving into a fourth career change now, and I think we lack the ability in Tasmania to harness the human potential in all the organisations I've worked in. And I've done a lot of study on organisations that do well, and they're the ones that harness the human capacity. So I don't think there's any problem in finding ideas, hence today, but if organisations can better harness those ideas, and what we need is a flexible and adaptive workforce. So it doesn't mean, I've been a tradesperson, I've been to university, I can jump from left to right. I'm still trying to work out what I want to do now, but I think if you have, it doesn't matter if, we don't need to keep the young people in Tasmania or just attract the elderly people. We can have everything, we can do both, we can do all of it. Yeah. And we don't have to, so I think fundamentally it's a way of, if we can make all of us think a little bit differently, so develop a multiple perspective view on how the world works, then we can do what we want to do. I think we limit ourselves. So the education system's not just about skills doing things, it's about the capacity to think in different ways.
I know this is always going to be too short, but where do we go from here in terms of sustaining and carrying forward to a better place, to a conclusion of some form, this conversation? Because I can see by the hands and the eye contact that we're not finished this conversation. We could be here all night and we're not going to finish this conversation. It's a complex conversation. We keep hearing lots of threads, lots of solutions, lots of problems, lots of things that are pushing us forward, lots of things that are holding us back. Mostly us. Mostly we're holding ourselves back, I think. Chris, how are we going to maintain this conversation? You wanted the floor.
Well, I think we don't have a command economy. We more and more have got a market economy. And in many respects, that just means if an entrepreneur comes and wants to build put in a mine or whatever it is, then the government entertains that, and if there's opposition, then it gets killed off and so on. So where does government have intervention? In the climate debate, we know very well that the government intervenes a lot. It intervenes in many, many places to encourage a certain type of development. And that's the case also in Tasmania, and it's to do with the problem of incumbency. What you've had in the past has got a lot of people attached to it, it's got a culture attached to it, it's got people who have worked in it, it's got entrepreneurs who are involved in it. What our imagination tells us is that we need to shift to a new place, but that's vacant almost, except for our imagination, and so there's a very big disparity there. Where the government comes in, and this is very important, is in being able to take this conversation and say, where's Tasmania going, and how does it use the limited instruments it's got in order to transition Tasmania in the most favourable way. And I don't think Tasmanian government is particularly prejudiced. If someone came along and wanted to do clean and green things, they would entertain it. But who comes along is the other people. And there's an historic thing that a big icon thing is what is going to save us. And if we can get away from that psychology, and the government can get away from that psychology, and I think it has, there's been a transition within government, Department of Economic Development included, to appreciate the fact that jobs in different places all around the state, dispersed jobs, are actually valuable, and there's a lot more work going on now towards that end than there has been. We've just got to help to facilitate that transition much more within government.
How well are we explaining these issues to the Tasmanian people? Are we doing a good job at that? I kind of feel that most Tasmanians kind of are on the page with the kinds of challenges and the kinds of solutions, the kinds of options and opportunities that we've been talking about tonight. Are we including everyone in this conversation?
I was just going to say we have an unrelenting source of bad news. The news most people see and repeat to each other comes from a single source.
Yeah.
And there's a preponderance of bad news, what we do poorly, our literacy rates, which actually are not that different to the rest of Australia. The average Australian literacy rate is not that different to Tasmania, but you don't see that in the news. So I feel like changing the news that we see, looking at what we do well, celebrating places that are similar to us, or places that have had similar challenges, and looking at what they did so people can imagine something else, because I think it is that we're stuck with this fear of what we know is disappearing whether we like it or not. Change is happening whether we like it or not, but we can't see what we can want. So I'd like to see us actually telling those kind of stories.
So some last quick thoughts. Really focus, tell us how you would like us, SLT, I'm speaking now as a board member of SLT, but us, the Tasmanian people, to take this conversation forward, to keep the conversation going. Philip, do you want to take the floor?
I just want to touch upon, and I think it is relevant as we go forward, dare I say it, politics for a moment. I think there's a real challenge to encourage our elected reps to put their support at not maintaining the existing. And it's a natural occurrence for politicians who are lobbied by the existing industries, the existing business. If you look at where the subsidies go, you look where they put their support, so much of that has historically been with what is. And they find it very hard. And I think we do need to encourage our politicians at all levels to think about what we need to encourage them, what could be, and in terms of where they put their resources, we do need to encourage them to be thinking about they go into the future. They're for the future things, not for propping up the current. And a lot of time, energy and money of government goes into propping up the current because there's a political imperative attached to it. We need to encourage politicians to put their energies to the future.
Jack, we're wrapping up, so it's going to be a quick one. How do we take this conversation forward?
I think it's articulating that vision, and I think there's a role for, and I don't think it's just politicians, but politicians are incredibly important, but it's also entrepreneurs, but maybe there's a facilitation role in getting those positive visions of what Tasmania could look like into the mass consciousness.
Penny, is this too important to leave to government? Why are we asking government to do this again? Why are we doing that?
I'm going to answer that question.
Good, thank you.
What I would like to suggest is one particular thing. We're talking before about young people leaving. In some ways that isn't a problem. What we want is them to come back. And one thing we can be looking at is trying to encourage young, what's it, diaspora?
Diaspora. The
The
Tasmanian
young
diaspora.
people, the
Love
young
it.
people in their 20s and 30s, about to have families maybe, find ways to make them want and able to come back and live here. Because I think Tasmania, particularly with climate change, is going to become a nicer and nicer place to live. But of course, if they're coming back, they do need a job and a house and a school and things like that. So get those ones who've left to come back.
Vicky's stiggling, but I'm not sure whether it's for herself. Yes, go Vicky.
Well, I'd like to ask Angus, why didn't you go away for your study?
That's a really, really, really simple question to answer, Vicky. It's because Tasmania is a goddamn paradise. I mean, I've just finished my degree down here, and I mean, I know a lot of my friends are going to the mainland. They're going overseas because of the reasons that I think everybody's outlined here. But I really don't want to leave because, as far as I'm concerned, I mean, Sydney and Melbourne are great places to visit, but Tasmania is a great place to live.
Yeah, man. I like this stuff. Yeah, Margaret?
Thanks. By the way, it turns out that most people who do leave Tassie do come back.
Yes, indeed.
And I'm one of them, I'm happy to say that. Yeah. Look, in terms of where we take this conversation next, I think it's important that all of us be champions for Tasmania. And we encourage the people that we interact with to be champions for Tasmania. And I think that there's every reason, there are many, many things for us to champion. We have a diverse and a diversifying economy. There's innovation happening in just about every element of society in Tasmania, and we should look to that. We should point it out, and we should applaud that. Beautiful. You talk about. I mean, it was interesting. I just chuckled when I saw that bottom of the heap article in the paper as well. Look, relative to just about every other Western economy, Australia is actually doing extremely well. I've just spent a year in Europe, and I didn't meet anybody from any country who didn't say to me, gee, I wish we could be like you guys. Yeah. And it's not as though Tasmania is the poor rump. You know, we might be a fraction of a percentage point or a percentage point here and there behind some of the other states, but in real terms and in relative terms, Tassie is doing fine. It's not to say that there aren't challenges, and it's not to say that we can't do some things better. The education thing is really is a challenge for us. I work at the university. I've seen some of the analyses that the university has done. Those parts of Tasmania where participation rates are low are not short of talent. It's not because people in those parts of Tasmania don't have brains. There's plenty of talent there. There is just not the culture of education and of thinking about going to university. And that, cultural shifts take time, cultural shifts take investment, cultural shifts need champions, and I think that's something that we really need to do. Look, can I just make one last point? Is that we must. I think it's really important that everyone recognises that we don't live in an economy. We live in a society, and economy is one element of that society. And there are sometimes some real values in that society that aren't necessarily directly in line with what an economic rationalist would have to say.
Yeah, hear. Siobhan, last word, and then we're going to ask for a heroic person to wrap up for us, Todd.
Look, I was going to say some of the same. I'm from the north of England, and so I'm quite used to, having to reinvent ourselves from having started the Industrial Revolution to really it collapsing in on us in a big way. Yeah. So, I know, going back to England, looking from afar, how much people from other parts of the world look at the paradise we live in and are envious of what we have. I'm minded tonight of the words of a Leonard Cohen song, "There's a crack in everything, that's where the light gets in." And I think it's important that's where we need to listen to the voices of the people who are here, who are our population, because there is creativity, passion and possibility that we're not actually listening to. There are lots of people who don't have the power to have a seat at the table. What we're seeing is a greater division and a greater discrepancy in power growing here as well. So some of us need to let go of our power, open our ears and our eyes and listen more to what the possibilities are, and it will be about our relationships, which we can have because we're a small place, that will make the difference over time.
Thank you very much. This is my last word, and so I'm going to thank you for reminding me why I came back to Tasmania after 25 years away. There's been quite a few times working in government, working in other places where I wondered why I had done that. Vicky is holding up evaluation, questionnaire, your final thought forms, which she's going to distribute if she hasn't already. Yes? For your use, but I do want to thank you for your participation in this incredibly important debate. I'm going to pass to Graham, and then Todd's going to wrap us up.
And look, I didn't have anything more to add except to reinforce what you said, Phil. I really hope personally that this is the start of a continuing conversation rather than conclusion. Please do use those feedback forms to give your input. Where's she gone? Marie's been doing a most amazing job in capturing. Oh, there she is. A fabulous job behind. I thought she'd just grown a beard over here. And Todd is now going to pull together the threads of where we go from here and what actions SLT might take. But there's some great recordings. We've got all those rich ideas and inputs. We've captured a lot on the wall, and please do fill in those forms and make sure you hand them in before you go. Thank you. Todd.
Thank you, everyone, for what has been a really thought-provoking and wonderful conversation that I've been really inspired by. And I'm going to attempt to pull some strings, a common thread through some of the things that many people have talked about tonight. One of the things I'd like to just mention is about hope and fear. There's been a lot of references to fears that we might have about the future or even the current situation, what's wrong with how we already are. And then other people have been talking about we need to remain optimistic. And I think that's a very important dichotomy, but I like to break dichotomies apart because it's always more complex than that. So here I've got a little matrix, that's the engineer in me. Fear in this direction, hope in that direction. But we've got a second axis here, and that's the positive and the negative aspects of these dimensions, hope and fear. So just to refer to my notes. I might start in the negative fear quadrant. So this is the fear of failure, that debilitating risk aversion, where we get stuck in the old economy and we're not able to change, even though change is going to happen anyway. And if we don't embrace it, then we're going to get caught off guard. So this is that debilitating risk aversion. We've got to try and avoid that. But there can be some positives to fear, and Jack was one person who touched upon this. There are some very serious global insecurities in terms of energy, in terms of food, in terms of water, and also economic, more generally, insecurities. And if we don't fear that, then we might get caught really off guard, unprepared for those big impacts. So this is about being prepared. And if we're prepared, then we're going to be much more resilient in the face of external change that's outside of our control. In the positive hope section, we spent a lot of time here, and that's because it's this is our favourite quadrant to be in. It's all smiles. This is about being confident. It's about realising what the opportunities are and grabbing them with both hands and going for it. And we definitely need to do that. And it was great. Towards the end of this discussion, we had so much positivity about how wonderful Tasmania is, and that's really how I feel about Tasmania. This is a remarkable place. There was, what was that quote? I think this could become our new motto. So many notes. What was it again? So Melbourne and Sydney are great places to visit. That's it. That could definitely be our, not a tourism campaign, but a come and move to Tassie campaign. And then in this final quadrant here, I don't think anyone actually really touched upon this in the discussion. And that can often be a weak point in our thinking. When we're being hopeful, we don't like to think that perhaps we're just being, sort of engaging in wishful thinking, and we've got some unrealistic expectations. Maybe Roscoe may have touched upon it a little bit there, saying that we can't just rely on cottage industries. Is that your point, Roscoe? Yeah. So that might be an example of not falling into that trap of false hopes. So just take that away and have a bit of a think about all 4 of those dimensions, because they're really, really important. Some of the things that we disagreed on, perhaps, or perhaps just had the multiple perspectives on the same thing that were overlapping. On population, we had quite a bit of a focus on how do we retain people, how do we stop people from leaving. But then there was the discussion later on about maybe we don't have to stop people leaving, we're just got to make sure that there's a reason to come back. And I'm sure that there are many people, in fact I'd love to see a show of hands, who's left Tassie to live somewhere else for a while and then come back here? And that includes me as well, and the guy in the sound booth as well, at the back there. So it is a wonderful place. And on that point, we touched upon, we're trying to get into what is holding us back. And I suspect that maybe the answer is not really all that much. Maybe we already have everything we need. I think we do. And finally, we started to get into what we need, what we're going to do about it. What are we going to do after having this really awesome, inspiring, thought-provoking conversation? What's next? I totally agree with what several people said, that we all need to go out and be champions for this positive vision for the future. So please go out and be a champion for Tasmania. And you can help us to do that by coming along to our sales pitch. The Sustainable Living Festival, this is our big flagship event for the year. It's on not this weekend, but next weekend, down at the Prince's Wharf with PW1. The theme this year is Make It. Make it happen. So let's make this positive vision for Tasmania happen. And while you're at it, please sign up as a member of Sustainable Living Tasmania and continue to be part of this discussion. So as you leave tonight, but not yet because we've still got more talking to do potentially, there's a whole bunch of these membership forms. They've got a picture of a woman holding tomatoes, which is a good thing to do in Tassie, growing tomatoes. So please grab a membership form and sign up if you're not already a member. Just before we wrap up, I'd like to say a big thank you to our 2 facilitators, which have done a marvellous job tonight, and also to Marie for taking the notes.